Amol, resource person has joined?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Sir, join हो चुके sir.
Okay. Okay.
Please.
So, on behalf of Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar, Marathwada University, Chhatrapati Sambhaji Nagar, I welcome our today's resource person, Ramchandra uh, Bhogale sir, born in 1955, holds a bachelor's degree of engineering and served as a chairman of Applied Innovation and Technology Group. Started his career in 1976 in the family business. He expanded the operation significantly, particularly in automotive industry since 1991. Today, his company plays a crucial role in automotive sector. Bhogle sir has actively participated in various social and industrial organizations, contributing significantly to cooperative banks, large trusts, healthcare facilities, and post trust, among others. He has held leadership position in local and state level industrial body and has been involved in numerous governmental committees. Furthermore, Bhogle sir has delivered lectures on various topics, both national and international, and has written extensively on current issues in various publications. He has also been a part of discussion on industrial, economic, and social topic on various television channels. For his contribution across diverse field, Boglesa has received accolades and awards from organizations like Fay Foundation, Maxwell Foundation, Marathwada, Mitra Mandal, and several others. Indeed, it is really an honor and pleasure to have him here as a resource person in today's afternoon session. He will deliver his talk on higher education and society. So once again, I would welcome Bhogle sir, and I would now hand over the proceeding to him. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for the nice introduction and short introduction. I hope I am audible.
Yes, sir, you are audible, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, as you all of you know now, that I am not from really a background of education, or I am not from an educational institution. We need to actually come on the same page when we are talking of higher education and society. Uh, as a part of Governing Council of Saraswati Bhuvan Education Society, Chhatrapati Sambhaji Nagar, I had the opportunity of actually getting exposed to many concepts in education. And for the last 5 years, when the central government introduced the National Education Policy 2020, I was heading that institution as president of the trust. We took a lot of initiatives to understand the national education policy, and my interactions with the professors in our colleges, Saraswati Bhuvan Education Society's colleges, and the school teachers amongst the 13, 14 schools that the trust runs, I realized that understanding of people working in the educational field about education are very superficial, except the teachers who have undergone some courses of B.Ed and M.Ed. The others have no idea about basically what education really means and what is the purpose of education. By and large, if you talk to common man, the purpose of education seems to be earning bread, getting a job, getting paid for whatever you do after that is the basic purpose of education. So to get a better job, you get higher education. That's the concept that people carry. Unfortunately, that's not true. That's not the right thing to believe in. That perception is not correct. The perception about education, that it is a means for earning bread, is very limited in its nature. And unfortunately, that's the only perception that most of the society has, including people working in education for 2 or 3 decades. Same perception carries. So, when I started looking into education as a means, and national education policy as the new policy being rolled out for improving the education, uh, I realized that the basic purpose of education as defined in national education policy is very different. There are two processes through which the education takes place. One is that of teaching, which is omnipresent in most of the educational institutions, and teaching is emphasized on. And therefore, each one of us working in the field of education feels that teaching has to be improved. Uh, Frankly speaking, if you really go into the dictionary meaning of teaching, what it defines teaching as is a systematic acquisition, rather systematic process where methods are used to transmit information, knowledge, and skills. So it's a systematic methods that actually help you to transmit information, transmit knowledge, and transmit skills. But if you really look at learning, it is systematic acquisition of information, skills, and knowledge. So one is actually transmitting the skills, knowledge, and information. The other is actually acquiring them. And when you are actually transmitting, the person who is receiving may not be receiving at the same speed as you are transmitting. See, all our educational institutions are bound by certain programs which have to be completed within a span of 9 or 10 months when actual teaching takes place. And then there are holidays during the year and after the year, and then there are examination periods when no teaching or learning takes place. So basically, in a very limited period, you need to actually transfer all the curriculum that's defined in the course to students who are actually trying to acquire it. And therefore, there is a time frame defined, predefined time frame. Unfortunately, not all students can acquire that information, that knowledge, or those skills in that time frame because everybody's speed is very different. And the system doesn't take into cognizance the speed at which a person is capable of acquiring knowledge, because this speed would vary between a student and another student, and for each student it would be different. So the emphasis on national education policy is on learning, not really on teaching. Because if you really want to achieve the goals of education, then learning becomes more important than teaching. And therefore, everywhere in national education policy, the emphasis is on learning and not really on teaching. And to learn, there is emphasis on actually activity based learning, because learning is knowledge acquisition is not only about information about a subject, but to really understand that concept and be able to actually use that concept. To use that concept in practice, people need skills, and without skills, any amount of knowledge that you may have is of no use. It's worthless if you do not have the skills to convert it into actually some gainful activity. So, actually acquiring knowledge along with honing your skills is something that is expected during process of education, and it is best achieved through learning, not really through teaching. Therefore, in the national education policy, if we really see what it really wants to achieve, I would request the organizers to go to the next slide. Yeah, this is our understanding. I mean, part of Saraswati Bhuvan, we actually did a lot of analysis, a lot of discussions with teachers and professors, and jointly we understood what is the purpose of the national education policy. So there are many comments embedded in the preamble of the policy and in the main body of the policy. But what we could understand, we have actually converted it into four statements. The first statement is education is fundamental and essential for achieving full human potential and its manifestation. So it's not only achieving the potential, but that potential must be manifested into something. It should be inclusive and equitable. Quality education promoting lifelong learning. So the purpose of education is to actually build a human being to his full potential and be able to actually use that potential in some manifestation. So every student who comes to an educational institution and whom you interact should be able to achieve his full potential, should be able to actually use it. And while he is undergoing this process of learning, the process should be inclusive and equitable. And the process should also imbibe in the person lifelong learning. So the person must learn to learn. And this is the basic purpose of education as far as the National Education Policy 2020 is concerned. Now, what should be the outcome of this education? The education should develop good human being having rational thinking and actions, not only thinking but also actions, courage and resilience, scientific temper and creative imagination with sound ethical moorings. So the product of this education should be a person who is a good human being, has a rational thinking, and based on this rational thinking, his actions should also be very rational. He should have the courage to act, and he should have the resilience to face difficulties. He must or she must have scientific temper and must be creative. All this with sound ethical moorings. So whatever you do after this process of education should be in the interest of the society. So that defines the product of educational system. Then comes the education should be more experiential. So actually about the education. So it should be more experiential, holistic, integrated, inquiry driven, discovery oriented, learner centered, discussion based, flexible, and most importantly, enjoyable. So you can start from the last factor first. We need to make the education enjoyable so that students who come to our institutions actually enjoy the process of transformation. It has to be very flexible. So no silos. I mean, if I choose commerce as my stream, I should be able to actually make a decision down the line somewhere where instead of commerce, I should be able to choose either science or any other stream for education. Once I realize what is my natural aptitude, what is my natural instinct, what is my aptitude, and if my aptitude is not about commerce, then a student should be free to choose some other stream of learning, and that flexibility has to be built into our system. It should be discussion based. It should not be a monologue where a person delivers a lecture and at the end of the lecture, the students are expected to understand everything that was delivered through that monologue. It should be discussion based. And it should be learner centered, not really teacher centered. It should be learner centered. So that defines the speed at which it could be delivered. If a learner is not able to acquire that knowledge or information at the speed at which it is being delivered, then the learner should be able to actually revisit the whole process and acquire it at his or her own speed. It should be discovery oriented and inquiry driven. So there should be a lot of encouragement to ask questions. Actually, in life, no question is a silly question. And no answer is the wrong answer, frankly speaking. Unless you raise questions and unless you start answering those questions, unless there is a group discussion among students and the resource persons, there cannot be any learning. And therefore, this learning has to be inquiry based, it should be discussion based, and it should actually drive people to be more courageous to ask questions. It should be also experiential. So, whatever you are discussing, people should be able to try it out. Students should be able to actually try it out. If they do not try it out, then the information or the concepts that are explained would not get actually converted to knowledge for that person, that student. So when they try it out and when they learn out of actions and learn out of experiments, whatever information, whatever concept has been explained to them gets converted into actually his or her knowledge. Otherwise, it remains knowledge of someone else, but not his or her knowledge. So this is about the process. This statement is about the process to be used in education. The last but not the least is about the institutions where this entire thing takes place, where the students come, where the educational process takes place. Is educational institute must offer safe and stimulating learning environment. This doesn't say teaching environment. This says learning environment, wide range of learning experiences, and good infrastructure where learner feels welcome and cared for. So learner should feel welcome and he or she should also feel cared for. So you care for the anxiety, you care for his or her ignorances, and the institution is actually trying to remove those ignorances, remove the lack of skills, remove the lack of knowledge, and to make that person realize his full potential is what the National Education Policy 2020 actually uh, aims at. And as I said, these are our findings. These are not the exhaustive findings. Each one of you can go into details of the National Education Policy booklet and draw your own conclusions as to what you could add or subtract from the statements that we have made in Saraswati Bowen Education Society. I'm actually delving into all this because this may not really be very pertinent to higher education and society, but it is pertinent to education. And unless we are on the same page, whatever I discuss about the involvement of society, yeah, I think someone has raised hand, so I would allow a question to be asked. May I?
No, sir, by mistake, it was raised.
Okay,
Now the hand
okay.
is put down. Huh?
That's fine. That's fine. But
Okay.
if someone has any inquiry, you could
Yes,
raise
yes.
your hand, and I'm willing to stop my monologue and actually enter into a discussion
Yes.
mode. So,
Part
so
Participant, if you have any question, our respected resource person has instructed that you can raise the hand. He will unmute and you can ask the question. If no questions are there, then we can continue. No
yeah,
problem.
yeah. Or at the end of the session, also we could have a question
Yes,
answer
that will be
session.
very good. That will be.
Yeah, yeah. We could have a question answer session. So I think this is an effort to try to bring us all on the same page. Education, as I understand it, education as you may have earlier understood, but now with this new discussions, your understanding may be very closer to my understanding of education, and that would help us to understand what is society's role in higher education. So may I request the next slide, please? So another finding that I had during my interaction with teachers and professors of college was understanding the foundational stones of education. So what does the building of education stands on? And there were many points that were discussed, many words came through. Ultimately, we realized that knowledge, skills, aptitude, and values are the basic foundation stones. The curriculum may change, the subjects may change, the streams may be different, but ultimately everything boils down to these four foundation stones on which education in any stream would stand on. Without knowledge, there is no imparting of knowledge. Without the skills, there is no use of that knowledge. Without the aptitude, actually acquiring that knowledge and skills becomes extremely difficult. And without values, use of all this knowledge, skills, and aptitude would be not really helpful to the society and the nation. So these are basically four founding stones of any process of education. And therefore, whether it is a primary education or secondary education or higher education, whether it is a technical education or any other professional education, whether it is humanities, I think in every sector of education, in every silo that we have had in the past, these four foundation stones are key, and without these four foundation stones, there cannot be any learning, gainful learning. Other factors that impact the outcome of all these educational processes is positivity. See, if a person is not positive, he may have a lot of abilities, he may have acquired a lot of skills, a lot of knowledge, he may have all the values that are necessary, but is not positive. So he would simply sit idle, or she would simply sit idle, do nothing. And unfortunately, if the person is of negative mindset or has a lot of ego, then all his actions would ultimately lead to destruction rather than creativity and construction. So along with aptitude, attitude is one of the most important factors for a person to be actually useful for a society and the nation in the long run. So, during the process of education, we also need to ensure that along with the values that we imbibe, we also imbibe positivity in the stakeholders who pass through this process of education. So these are our findings, and I am sure all of you would more than agree that without these, all the education would be of no use to the society. Next slide, please. Yeah. So other perception in the educational field is that educational progression is from the primary school to standard 1, standard 2, standard 3, up to graduation, post graduation, or post graduation PhD degrees. That's the standard progression that we know of. But if we go back to our country's educational system, say 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago, when our nation was one of the most prosperous nation, it contributed almost 30% of the GDP of the entire world and contributed to almost 26-27% of the international trade. So we were one of the largest economies. We were one of the largest trade partners of all the other developing economies. So we were the most advanced economy. And any economy becomes developed only based on its education. So what was our education then? The concept described here, unfortunately defined by Bloom's in 1956, after studying the education system, and which is now adopted as the basic Bloom's taxonomy, is that you start as a young kid or a toddler by remembering things. Then the next stage is to understand what you have remembered. The third stage of education is to actually start using what you have remembered and what you have understood. The fourth stage is to start actually analyzing what you are using. The fifth stage of education is actually to be able to evaluate what you have learned and what you are using and what you are able to analyze. And then the last stage is you may have acquired knowledge and information and skills in various streams, actually to combine all of them to create something new. And if you are able to create something new, you have actually graduated in the process of education. Therefore, in our earlier avatar of Bharatiya education, there was no graduation. The gurus would observe you and they would assess your abilities, they would assess your knowledge, they would assess the value systems of which you followed, and they would decide whether you were fit to be in the society to use whatever you have acquired during the process of education, and then they would say that, okay, now you have finished your education here and you may go to the society and pursue your daily life. So there was no first standard, second standard, third standard. That was the process of education. And of course, there were universities, but in universities also, the programs were not time bound. The programs were bound by learning outcomes and not by time bound programs. And the tests were not one time tests. The tests were continuous evaluation of a pupil by the gurus, all 360-degree. So various gurus would actually evaluate a person and then ultimately declare him fit to face the society and leave the educational system. So I think we need to understand whatever we are doing in our classrooms, whatever we are doing in our institutions, basically must lead to these 6 steps. And unless your student or your pupil or your stakeholder is clearly evaluated on the 6 steps as to where he or she stands, all the efforts that we put in higher education would be worthless. Now, a person need not be at the last stage and not being on the other stages. In some areas, a person could be on the last stage, that is very creative, but in some areas, the same person could be just remembering things. It all depends on the natural aptitude of that person, his interest or her interest, and depending on that, a person may achieve creativity in certain fields while being a primary student in other fields. But that doesn't matter. As long as wherever he has achieved the step 6, that is creativity, is good enough to sustain him or her in his or her life and is able to contribute to the society is good, I think that should be good enough for any person. There is no need for a person to understand everything under the sun, all the knowledge and all the skills. That is impossible. But people are multifaceted, and you will find people who are outstanding. They do pursue many streams of learning and acquire a lot of skills and are equally capable in any of those fields. But they are exceptions, they are not the really rule. And therefore, as a rule, we could accept that a student has to actually be creative and capable in any one field or maybe two fields, but not maybe at primary or secondary stage of learning in any all other fields. So I think we need to understand this. And whenever you are teaching any subject, whenever you are interacting with a student, your effort should be to understand and analyze as to in which areas your people are at what stage of learning. These 6 stages are key to those, and therefore your continuous evaluation, which is expected in National Education Policy 2020, would not depend purely on the subject knowledge. It would depend on all these 6 keywords that are there in Bloom's taxonomy. So next slide, please. See, when we talk of values, actually our literature mentions basic values which are absolutely essential. And these are embedded in a lot of our literature, which is 2000, 3000 year old. And this literature and these values are not specific to any particular uh, religion. These are actually something to do with culture, not religion. And therefore, these values are universally found in many books that discuss about various religions. Our culture was fortunate enough to actually do a lot of studies and put them into books and various books, not just one book or two books, but in various books in details and their impact on a person in details. And therefore, these values you would find embedded in any religious book, whichever the religion, and you would also find them embedded in a lot of literature coming from our own country, our own culture. So a lot of them are very difficult to understand. Akrodh is complete absence of being angry. There is no anger. Then there is courage. So if you are courageous, that is nirbhay. Then there are many other things which are mentioned. Shanti, that is peace. Tap, that is being able to actually focus and concentrate on one thing without disturbance of any other thing. Shama, all these values are absolutely important, and at times you feel that some of those values are contradicting, but they are not. This is not a discourse on values, so I'll not go into those details, but these are important values, and therefore as influencers, as being resource persons in various institutes, we should actually understand all these values, and we should be able to actually make use of this knowledge while we evaluate our students on their progress on those six steps which we actually supposed to do. So next slide, please. See, when you actually want to evaluate a person as to what he or she has achieved, there are a lot of attributes that we talk of, and there are a lot of skills that we talk of. These skills and these attributes are key to a person being very effective. That's part of his personality or her personality. And therefore, actually knowing about all these attributes and skills is equally important. I mean, it should be in our consciousness that these are the skills that probably are going to be used by this person when he or she faces life. And these are the attributes that will be very essential for this person. Now, I have not mentioned the values for a simple reason that if you analyze the attributes, you will find that an attribute is actually a combination of a skill and a value. An attribute is always a combination of some skills and some values, one skill and one value. Therefore, whatever we call gun, Gunasampanna, is a person who actually has some skills, very useful skills, and some values which actually make those skills very useful to the society. So these skills and these attributes are absolutely essential. And while a person is undergoing the process of education, there are some skills and some values that would be imbibed at the initial stage of learning. That's between age of 3 and 7. Then some values and some skills would be imbibed post 7 up to age of 12, and then some before the person becomes age of 17 or 18. And beyond 17 and 18, a person is exposed to higher education, and therefore by the time a person reaches higher education stage, his persona is already well defined. You only need to actually refine the skills, refine the attributes in that person, and maybe in remote case you may add some skills and add some values to that person's persona so that he acquires more attributes and becomes perfect person. But higher education is not actually supposed to actually do this. This needs to be finished by age of 16 or 17 or 18 when the person enters field of higher education. So I'm just showing these slides, and you may access those slides through the organizers, and you can keep them in your records so that this becomes a reminder for you uh, whenever you are evaluating a student, whenever you are evaluating a person who is undergoing the process of learning, this would come in handy. Thank you. Next slide, please. See, the whole process of learning, as we said, is actually to make a person face life boldly, courageously, and effectively. That's the whole purpose of education. So without understanding what are going to be the challenges in front of the product of education, how can we actually deliver what is required to face those challenges? So basically, the educational system must understand what are the future challenges, the challenges that our generation faced, the challenges that your generation faced were very different. The challenges that next generation is going to face or maybe has started facing are very different from the challenges that we faced. And therefore, we must understand what are the challenges. So actually, the society is going to be a knowledge society, free of poverty, inequality, and intolerance. That's the challenge. You need to create a society which will be knowledge-based society, which will be free of poverty, which will be free of inequality, and will be free of intolerance. Is a challenge that the next generation is going to face. To some, for some, in some measures, we also face the challenges, but they were not the mainstream challenges as far as we were concerned. Readiness for emerging IR, that is Industry 4. Industry 4 is very different from the industry that we have seen in the past. Technologies and their impact on nature and society, they are going to be very different. We have already started facing some challenges because of the technologies. There is a lot of disturbance because of the information-based technologies in learning process. There are a lot of disturbances in the nature because of various technologies that we are using. And we need to make our students, make our products aware that they are going to face this industry 4 and a lot of impact of technology on the environment. Readiness for pandemics. I mean, the last pandemic that we heard was in 1920 and the next pandemic came in only 2020. So about 100 years difference between the last pandemic and this pandemic. But it is predicted that the pandemics will become a regular part of our life as we come out with a lot of technologies and as we come out with a lot of uh, development of science. It would have its negative impact on the society, which would lead to a lot of pandemics. So, ready-made to face pandemics, readiness to face globalization, which in part for last 30 years we have all been facing, and readiness to face climate change. Climate change also has made an impact on our day-to-day lives, but it is going to increase as the time passes, and therefore our future generations will have to be more aware and they would have to be ready to face the impact of climate change. To reduce the impact of climate change, we need to make them aware of reduce, refuse, reuse, recycle, recover, and restore. Now, when I look at all these words, I go back to maybe 1,000 years ago lifestyle of our country, and we practically were using every concept which is defined here. But in the intervening period, we have actually lost touch with many of these words. Instead of reducing our consumption, we believe in increasing our consumption. Instead of refusing the temptations, we have become more prone to temptations. Instead of actually reusing a lot of things, we are becoming more use and throw society. Instead of recycling things, we actually use and throw. And instead of recovering things, we believe in actually replacing things. So all this has led to certain economic growth, but it has also led to a lot of challenges that the society is facing, and therefore we will need to make our students, the stakeholders, aware of the benefits of this reduce, refuse, reuse, recycle, etc. And we may have to go back and turn the clock maybe 1,000 years back when the society was actually doing all these things and was a very prosperous society in spite of that. And I would also say that it was also very healthy society in spite of all using all these concepts. The last but not the least is the readiness for aspirational yet sustainable. Now, you can't tell people not to have mobiles, automobiles. So they are going to be there. And people would aspire to acquire better and better automobile. Everybody would aspire to acquire better and better gadgets. But at the same time, are we really living a sustainable life? I mean, you may be aspirational about the size of your home, the size of your car, the brand of your clothes. But question is, whatever you are aspirational about, is it sustainable? One is at personal level, can you sustain that lifestyle? And second is at the society level, whether it is actually sustainable for the society and the nation. We find if we study the progress of various nations around the world, we will find that these nations were aspirational, the societies were aspirational, and today these nations and societies are facing actually threats to their very existence. Whether we agree or not, a lot of developed countries are facing threat to their existence, very existence, their society's very existence, the existence of the culture with which they have moved. There are threats, and we need to understand that they are basically because of their aspirations. Now we need to actually calibrate our aspirations so that they become sustainable. Our lifestyles become sustainable. And therefore, these are the challenges before education. Unless we actually understand these challenges, we will not be able to make sure that our people, our students are prepared to face these challenges. Next, next slide, please. Yeah. So, what are the skills required to face all this? And you would really be wondering as to are these the skills required? But these are the skills, and they're very basic. They're very basic. So, even to face the most complicated situations, and even to reverse the most complicated situations, what is really required is the basic, the foundational literacies like numeracy, scientific literacy, information technology literacy, financial literacy, and cultural and civic literacy are basic literacies that would be required to face the challenges that I mentioned prior to this. What would be the competencies required? So, basic competencies required would be critical thinking and problem solving, creativity, communication, and collaboration. You see, what is lacking in most societies is the collaborative approach. Every individual wants to stand out. We are told from our childhood that there is a competition and you need to lead. You have to be the first. They never teach us that all of us need to be the first. Unfortunately, we are always told that you have to be the first. You must score maximum. You must be in the first few of the merit list. But collaboration is most important. Communication is most important. All your knowledge and skills would be of no use to society if you are not able to communicate with the society as to what you really want to do. What is it that you are doing and how it is beneficial to the society? So communication is very necessary. Being creative is also very necessary because the same solutions which have failed in the past are not going to really help you to resolve future problems. You need to be creative about finding solutions, and therefore creativity becomes one of the basic competencies to face the future challenges. Same with critical thinking and problem solving. And what are the attributes, what are the characters that would be required? One is curiosity. You see, you have to be curious. So lifelong learning comes in handy when you are curious. If you do not know how to learn, if you have not learned it during the process of your schooling and college, then your curiosity will be of no use because you will not know how to learn new things. And without a curiosity, you will never even feel the necessity of learning new things. So curiosity is a must. Initiative is a must. If you have the courage, you will have the initiative. Persistence and grit. There will be many failures. It may be a very time consuming process, but unless you have persistence and grit, you will not reach where you aspire to reach or where you need to reach. Adaptability. You see, situations change. You are thrown into new situations by design with your own liking, without your liking, and not without any design. You need to learn to be adaptable so that you adapt to the new situation and then try and find out a reasonable solution and actually lead a very successful and happy and peaceful life. You need also to learn to lead people because not everybody is going to have all these character qualities. Not everybody will have the competencies. Not everybody will have all the literacies that are required. So leadership qualities are absolutely required. And last but not the least, social and cultural awareness. So all your actions should not lead to any kind of backlash from the society. So to understand the society and to understand the culture, you should be very aware of the culture in which you are working and the society to whom you are wanting to contribute to. Unless you understand them, unless you are aware about their uh, weaknesses and strengths, you will not really be able to contribute. So these are the 21st century skills, which in fact are the first century skills and which would remain very constant, whatever may be the challenges in future. 100 years hence, I think the education would still be discussing the same literacies, same competencies, and same character qualities because they are timeless and we need to acquire them. They are basic qualities. So with this, move to the next slide. Next slide, please. See, now the purpose of higher education. You see, the purpose of higher education is not actually to teach. The purpose of higher education is to actually advance the basic sciences, social sciences, and arts. So the purpose is actually to do this, to advance the basic sciences, to advance the social sciences, and to advance the various performing or otherwise arts. The next purpose is to integrate curriculum with the economic activities for generating personal and economic advancements. So the purpose of higher education is to actually integrate the curriculum with the economic activities surrounding the institute. Wherever you are located, if it is a highly industrialized belt, then your institute should be focusing on actually integrating your curriculums with the requirements of industry, the challenges of industry. If it is a highly agricultural area, then you should actually be addressing all your efforts towards agriculture, all your curriculum should be towards agriculture. If it's a highly trading area, then actually your curriculum should be designed so that the students are able to integrate well with the trading activities surrounding you. And there are various sectors of economy which are either very prominently present in an area or there is a combination of various sectors which is present in the area. Now, your higher education in that particular area should be actually tailored to meet the requirements of the economic activities in that area so that it prepares your students and stakeholders to actually benefit personally, and there is economic advancement and personal advancement possible for these students. The next purpose is to study and extend help in solving hurdles faced by the society. So actually problem solving. What is it that your society is facing? What hurdles are being faced by the industry? What hurdles are being faced by the agriculture? What hurdles are being faced by the trading community? What hurdles are being faced by the tourism sector in your area? I think the higher education institutes are required to study these hurdles and come out with solutions. Come out with solutions which will apply to that area, and it would help the society to actually remove these hurdles so that their progress improves. It is much faster as compared to what it is today. And education's purpose is also to create new opportunities. So all the points previously discussed are about what is already available, but what is available today may not be relevant tomorrow. And therefore, to create new opportunities for gainful engagement by developing technologies, products, and economic models. So you have an economic model which is fully based on trading or maybe an agriculture. You need to develop a different economic model which would help to actually develop the society around you and the region based on a completely different economic model. So who would propose these economic models? See, the industry is not really good enough to propose these economic models. It is the academia which is actually required to study and actually propose these economic models. The academia is actually required to come out with new products, new technologies, and actually give it, pass it on to industry and the various institutions, economic institutions in your area, including banking. I mean, there are economic models for banking also, which would be very different from banking in some other area. So we need to think in terms of this, and the purpose of higher education is actually to do all these things. It is not only to acquire a degree. It is also not to ultimately acquire some job. The basic purpose of higher education is much beyond what is right now thought of. And therefore, we need to understand the purpose of higher education. And let's move to the next slide as to how to achieve these goals. See, where can the society then get involved when the purpose is so wide and we have to do it in the time frame given to us by various institutions that govern us? How can society get involved in this? So developing infrastructure has been there since long. I mean, I need not dwell upon it. There have been donors and there have been institutions who have created infrastructure, labs, learning centers, sports facilities, and recently incubation facilities for various institutions and universities. A lot of it may have come from the government, but I know for sure that a lot of it has also been contributed by the economic activities being conducted around this institution. So traders have contributed something, industry has contributed something, the professionals, doctors, lawyers, they have contributed something. Even the sports personnel have contributed something, and these infrastructure. But there is a scope for increasing the participation of society in creation of all these facilities. Right now, our emphasis is mostly on fees that is being collected, and it is on the other hand mostly on the government grants that we are able to garner. So one is the UGC grants or the government grants and the various government schemes. And the second source is the fees that we collect. But apart from this, the contribution of society needs to actually increase substantially. And if all of you study the models on which the new universities have developed in the modern world, whether it is US or Germany or UK, you go to any modern developed countries and you will find that universities are dependent on the industry and the society for development of infrastructure. It is not funded necessarily by the government. It is definitely not funded out of the fees that is collected. A lot of it, a large part of it is funded through the various activities that the society does for these institutes of learning. Inputs for relevant curriculum. Now, if the purpose of higher education is to actually integrate with the local economy, then the curriculum has to be designed by the people who are actually working in that local economy, be it trade or agriculture or industry or whatever the form of economic activity. Actually, they should be contributing to framing the curriculum, and they should be fully involved in framing the curriculum. Board of studies in university elected from the professors is not good enough. In fact, a large part of that board of studies should be professionals who are actually working on field. And they should not come from just one field of activity. They should come from various backgrounds and various field of activity. Then only the curriculum would be a kind of holistic and inclusive. And therefore, actually receiving inputs from all these people while framing curriculum is an area where society can have a major stake. Funding for sustenance. Now, creating seats for paying some good professors who teach particular or who are able to actually influence students to further the knowledge of basic sciences or further the knowledge of technologies, improve the technologies, add to new technologies. Now you need to actually create seats. The present system of compensating the professors has two basic lacunas. One, it is entirely driven by bureaucracy, and two, it is actually time bound. So at certain age, the professor has to retire. Whatever his capabilities, whatever his knowledge, whatever his or her experience, the professor is expected to get out of the system at a certain age. Whereas all good universities all over the world would let the professors continue to be very actively involved in student development, even in advanced stages. 80, 90 years, you will find professors still working very actively with students for developing new technologies, for developing new patents. So we need to actually create seats where it would not be time bound. Someone donates money and says that, okay, as long as the professor is useful, continue to compensate him or her for her efforts and let the professor continue to work in the teaching institute as long as he is capable of doing it. Scholarships. Now, a lot of students are incapable of sustaining the expenses involved in actually getting educated. So, scholarships is another way of making sure that these students get enough resources to sustain that process of education. Funding basic and social research. Now, who would fund the social and basic research? Research needs a lot of resources. It needs a lot of direction. It needs a lot of inputs. And that means a lot of expenditure. Who would do this funding? To some extent, the government does it. To some extent, the defense departments of various countries are doing it. But they would actually help you to do technological development research or basic sciences research. Who would help you to do research on social sciences? There are sciences which are related to medical and health. There may be some funding coming from pharma and other industries. There would be some funding coming from defense related industries. But who would allow you to study certain problems which are not specifically belonging to any particular area? So if some university or some educational institutions wants to undertake a extensive social research on farmers' suicides. Can you think of any institutions which would come forward apart from the government? Who would come forward to do this? So, society's involvement in such funding is absolute must, and that would lead to a lot of research which would help us to come out with solutions to such persistent problems. We have been hearing of farmers' distress for last 20 years or more, but there is no solution. The loan waivers is not a solution. Giving subsidies is not a solution. Uh, any amount of interventions in the last 40 years has not really helped. Actually, the situation has worsened in over the last 40 years instead of improving. So there means between the measures that are being taken and the actual problem, there is a large gap. So people are acting, or the government and the banks are acting based on perception, not on the real knowledge and not on the real research and its findings. So we need people to come forward and actually sponsor all these activities, including the learning activities and events. There are many events which help students to acquire a lot of skills, whether they are sports events, whether they are cultural events, whether they are events of different kind. Maybe a debating competition, maybe some other competitions. All these actually help people involved in the process to acquire a lot of knowledge, a lot of skills, and therefore we need people to come forward and help us sustain all these activities. So that is where society's role is very important. Society could be involved in infrastructure, it could be involved in framing curriculum, it could be also involved in making the education process of education very sustainable. Next slide, please. The other area where actually society can participate is actually learning exercise of students. Now, in the learning exercise, the students are supposed to do a lot of activities, and the society is also a stakeholder in their learning activities. Like someone has been working in an industry, someone has been working in a bank, someone has been working in a hospital, someone has been working in an NGO, someone has been working in farm, agriculture, high-tech agriculture, or dryland agriculture. All these people could actually contribute as adjunct professors to educational institutions. A lot of people can only come and share their experiences, triggering the thinking process of all those stakeholders. There could be people who could guide projects which are taken up by the educational institutions in actually honing skills for the students, in improving their understanding of a lot of issues faced by the society. So, society can participate in these learning exercises. Participation in research and development, actually sharing expertise for research, which would cut time of reaching to a conclusion. Otherwise, you would be groping in dark, you would be trying out many things, and ultimately a research project would take a long time to come to a conclusion because uh, people sitting in the educational institutions may not be the real experts. Their knowledge about the subject would be the best, but their experience of what is happening in the field would be minimum. And therefore, people who are actually in the field would help you reduce the time of the research projects, whether they're actually about a technology, actually about developing some kind of a product or developing some kind of a molecule. I am sure sharing expertise by industry and professionals who are practicing in the field would help you reduce time. Participating in surveys. I mean, I am not willing to actually do, but to truthfully answer the surveys is something which would be a great contribution. I mean, we are doing survey on certain problem faced by the society. certain health issue that is faced by a society, a community in particular area. Now, if the community is not forthcoming with all the facts and figures, the survey would go nowhere. So just participating truthfully and giving answers to all the questions truthfully would also help the educational institutions. And sponsoring such projects would be a very ideal, which we have already discussed. The last but not the least is actually internship opportunities for students. Now, the national education policy envisages that every student, whatever he or she may be pursuing, whichever field, whichever stream of learning, they are expected to actually work in the field for part of the time that they are in the process of learning. They are a part of the educational process. They are expected to actually work. Where will the opportunities come from? How will you place all the students? So actually arranging actual work experience for students in trading, banking, industry, agriculture, local self-government, Zilla Parishad, Gram Panchayat, corporations, I mean municipal corporations, all these have tremendous opportunities to gain experience. Government departments, I mean BNC, the Department of Electricity, are large departments where students could be placed and their knowledge and their experience of working in these departments would really make them worthy of the education that they are taking, and they would make them very uh, I mean, they would really help them develop the potential so that instantly they become useful to the society as soon as they pass their graduation. There are NGOs, there are service providers, there are security contractors, there are security forces, all economic activities that are not mentioned here would actually present opportunities for internship, either compensated for or without any compensation. Monetary compensation, I am talking of. In certain areas, maybe the organizations agree to pay certain compensation, but in most of the areas, they may not agree to pay any compensation. But it would be a great opportunity for the students to actually try out what they have learned in the institutions and actually gain some more knowledge which is not there in the curriculum. So, society's involvement from all walks of life is most important in creating these opportunities for students, which is envisaged in the national education policy. Next. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. I think someone who is managing this is not in his seat. Yeah, thank you. So this is the last slide, which actually shows you all the components that we discussed during our coming on the same page. Not really the participation of the society in higher education, but basic understanding of education, which shows the foundational stones, which shows the values, the attributes and the skills, the steps of actually evaluating a student and in the process of learning, the education 3, and the skills that one needs to acquire for facing future challenges. This is a gist of whatever we have discussed. This one poster gives you gist of whatever we have discussed. And the last slide, please. Next slide, please. Could we have the next slide? Anyway, this almost brings us to the conclusion of whatever I wanted to deliver and whatever I want to discuss. If there is something else in the next slide, we would certainly discuss that. But in the meantime, I would like to throw this house open for any queries, any questions, any thoughts that you may have had to share with this forum. All participants, may I ask the organizers, as and when the hand is raised, you could unmute the person and allow them to speak and share their thoughts. See, may I request the organizers? There is one request from 184, which says that he would like to speak or he would like to speak and contribute something. बिल्कुल ही रुक गई है. Okay, okay. Am I audible?
Yes, sir. You are audible, sir.
Okay. Okay. So to all, see, there is one question in the chat box which is what type of changes are needed in higher educational institutions to face the new education policy 2020. Actually, during our discussions, I have mentioned that involvement of society in educational institutions is an absolute must. The educational institutions will have to become really very flexible. They will have to have a lot of outreach where they not only let the society come into their premises and precincts, but also go out and meet the society wherever they are working and actually bridge this gap between the society and the educational institutions. Unless you open up, unless you face the society, unless you interact with the society, uh, new education policy will remain a great challenge to the educational institutions. But if you integrate and become a collaborator with the society in a big way, I'm sure that National Education Policy 2020 will not be a challenge. It will actually become an enjoyable process for all of you, a different experience, but certainly a very enriching experience. Any other questions? Can we have the next slide? I think if there are no further questions, I think we could conclude this. If the organizers regain their internet connectivity, then we could conclude this. Well, thank you. Thank you, everyone.
So, sir, you have concluded?
Yeah, I have concluded. I mean,
Okay,
I don't see any other questions also
yes, yes.
in the chat box. So, when if someone has to ask, then we could unmute and we could still discuss. But I have concluded whatever I had to
Okay.
say.
So, participants, any questions? Participants, if there are any questions, you can unmute.
Hello.
Yes, 184.
Yes, sir. I want just clarification about how internship opportunity useful in involvement in society
Yes.
or related with the involvement. Sir, may I repeat my question? Hello.
Why?
Now,
Yes, sir. हेलो जी 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 चलेगा ठीक ओके so there is some bandwidth issue so I am really thankful to Ram Bhogle sir for sparing his valuable time for this afternoon session and delivering a nice lecture to all of us. I'm really thankful to you sir and I now declare this technical session is over. Thanks a lot.